kneel to me. Her voice came from behind Osrith, and they glanced over her shoulder. Still battle-clad, Ethelfled held her sword aloft. Ha! Osrith scorned, and put away Buay. She would not fight the bitch, not give her the satisfaction of the event. You swore to Mercia I am the Lady of Mercia, Ethelfled pointed out. You were not there when I knelt before your husband, and swore to Mercia its land, its earth, its rivers. You not the ruler to whom I swore. Poor Oldham witnessed. Did he not tell you one night? And she had her. Everyone saw Ethelfled take a quick movement to Osrith, which she quickly concealed. But it was too late. Osrith, meanwhile, stood unmoved, unarmed. You chose Ethliad, Ethelfled clarified. I chose Ethliad, yes, repeated Osrith, but I was too late. You can thank me later. You are as impertinent as your brother, Ethelfled accused. Clearly a quality you find appealing. Osrith spat back, then glanced back to Uhtred. Even if you are war-wise as a mouse's cock. Shouldn't the trash talk begin before the battle? Finan, ever quick to use black humor to quench hostilities, spoke for everyone watching. And, between us and the enemy, they had all used every bit of their strength for many hours holding the field, and the conflict between the two women was not needed. But that was the spectators' opinion. Between themselves, this conflict had been simmering for decades. Osrith ignored Finan, and she glanced at Uhtred, who was putting no effort into hiding his amusement. You were not at Bedford, or Chester, Ethelfled accused. Nor you at St. Andrews Dunedin, Dunnottar, 3 times, Dunkeld, Stirling, Doyer, Armagh, Benfleet. Twice. Osrith paused, playing up thoughtfulness. Once, you were there, but not upright. Osrith then turned her back to Ethelfled and took a step towards Uhtred. Good to meet you, brother. I am sure Ethelfled was overwhelmed with excitement in telling you. She glanced at his leg. I trust you regain your strength. Wait. Called Uhtred, his face confused, potent questions filling his mouth. But Osrith was already stalking back through the war dead on the battlefield, over to the mercenaries, who were greeting her as one of their own, as well they might. She had been one of their own, on and off, for the last 20 or so years. Feeling the silver piece in her hand, her thoughts were drawn to Finan for a moment, and Osrith dashed them away as she slipped the metal into her pocket. And, now to Alba, Osrith thought, as she trod the muddy, blood-stricken ground to the stores. Fires were already blazing, to heat water and treat the dead, to make food for injured and uninjured men. Mercia will give me food this night, and I am owed a horse, Osrith thought. Her heart wrenched when she thought again of Aldhelm being brought down. He had done so much to renew the spirit of the mercenaries with St. Oswald. Ethliad, should he recover, would sore miss his advisor. And that was another situation, should he not? An hour later, and Osrith had found the brown mare which had carried her from Bardney. Better a beast she knew than another, and she made sure it was fed and saddled before looking north. To leave now was the best thing, as the battle crossed that liminal frontier from ended into past, where clean-up and spoils collection became feasting and celebration. But there would be no feasting for the mercenaries. Ethliad was critical, and would have to have divine intervention to recover. North took her towards Ethelfled's own town of Stafford, where the road would continue beyond Mercia and into, nominally, Northumbria. Osrith had taken the road before, but in reverse, when she had come down from Bibbenberg. Now, she would travel roughly the same route back, and considered whether she should go back to Weir and congratulate him for holding the fortress. No need to decide now, Osrith thought. Just get to Manchester, to where Osbert, Alfred's firstborn, now released from Uhtred's service, held a garrison. With Weir's wife living with him, she added grimly. Not her fight, she added, as she looked at the first river that she was to cross, the Tame. And then she turned. It could have been so much different, Osrith thought. She could have dash. But her thoughts came to a halt when she caught King Edward's eye. His temples rose as his eyes recognized her, but then he went back to discussion with his advisors. Ethelm, Osrith thought, grimly. His wife's father. She really disliked the man, and Osrith wondered whether it was because he had taken Nodua lands. He had been a true lord, a gentleman, honorable. By contrast, Ethelelm was scheming and self-serving. Osrith pulled at the reins of her horse as she turned her, but pulled up sharply when she saw a person running towards her. Finan, and beside him, her brother. The mare shook its head in a defiant way as it expressed its displeasure at being halted. "Where do you go?" Utad asked, when he finally got himself next to the horse. The leg injury would take some healing, Osrith surmised. "North." "Young Edru is there," she added. Utad stepped back, and she expected Finan, his shadow, to do so too. But instead he took her arm. "You kept the silver," he pointed out, and this time it was Osrith's turn to slip from the saddle and delay the horse's pleasure to ride. She reached down and held his hand, then drew it to her stomach. "Your child," she said, smiling. The look on his face was worth the telling. But then the father of Osrith's child glared at her, as realization flooded his brain. "And you fought in a battle? And you will be fighting another," Osrith reassured him. "Ethelred will not be long for this world. Elford will be married off and there will be a fight for Mercia. The Lady of the Mersons will not step aside." And, it was Finan shaking his head that stayed her tongue, and he pulled her close. "Hami Modha tilde square die," he told her, his fingers tracing her hairline. "It can only be," she replied. "Pa tilde squared s me, Osrith, Mojale?" he asked, taking the hand in which Osrith held his silver piece. "I have only one home, Finan Moor," she told him. "Thajalagamort, Thyra and Buka's daughter lives there. Dunnota. When you come to fetch me, then I will marry you, Irishman. But you have to want me more than you want Utad." She stepped back, and reached for her horse's reins. Pain crossed his face. She didn't mean it. It was Utad she wanted to hurt, and Osrith knew she was lashing out at the one person she loved the dearest in all the world. "You have a life here," she added, softening her blunt words. He pressed her hand to his chest as he moved his to her lower stomach, as if checking his memory that she had actually said what she had. And they parted, with no more words. When he felt his oath to Utad had been spent, Osrith told herself, as the fields gave way to sandstone rocks on the road north, "That will be when he comes. It could be tomorrow, or never." "So that is your sister," Ethelfled said, who had come to stand by her former lover. "You knew?" Utad replied, shocked. "How long?" "Perhaps 6 months." She smiled at him. "The question is, how could you not have guessed?" Utad looked across to Finan, who was watching Osrith ride away, but got no backup there. "She fights like you, behaves like you," Ethelfled continued. "Not she wasn't raised by Danes." Utad narrowed his eyes. "Raised by Picts, which is worse. Or Gales." "Who can tell the difference?" "I can," Finan said, vaguely, watching Osrith go until she was a speck in the distance. When Ethelfled excused herself, and returned to a council, which had become an informal witan, Utad turned to his friend as a memory surfaced. "I wronged her," he told his friend. "At Aylesbury. I feel the same. She has just told me she is, well. She's riding away," Finan said, eyes still north. But he slapped his friend's shoulder to make him look at him. "Finan, I wronged her," Utad said, his eyes burning into Finan's. "You know I went to see Hild." She lay dying. "She said it was her wish that Osrith and I were reunited." Utad laughed an ironic laugh. "For all the gods, Finan." Because the realization was falling into place in Utad's mind. "She hates you, for some reason," Finan said, obliquely. "You know the reason?" Finan shook his head in the evening sunlight. "I don't," he insisted, when he saw Utad's face. "So was told who it was who caused the death of Gisela." It wasn't a confession, as such, just Utad sharing his thoughts with the surroundings. Or, at least, that's what he told himself. "He told me she was a witch. So I dealt with her." What? Finan looked at his friend. "Look, Utad, you gotta tell me that again. I don't think I heard you the first time." "You heard me," Utad said, miserably. "I found out she was there. Hild confirmed it. She gave Gisela herbs during the birth. And she did not deny it." "Births are tricky," Finan said, holding Utad's gaze. "Women take herbs, give herbs. God love them, they are not as strong as we are." Utad said nothing for a moment, just watched his friend's face. You know she sought herbs from the Britons? Finan said nothing. You know Osrith sought herbs from the Britons. It was not a question. Osrith had been unconscious when Finan had carried her there, bloody and close to death. She had used herbs then. Finan knew in his heart the child she had tried to eliminate had been Edward's, and he had begged, pleaded with Allah to keep her alive. And the British healer had. Now, she had assured him she was going to a place she thought of as safe, with the miracle that was his child, being carried by her, the woman he loved. She had kept his silver piece. Could he ride after her now, and tell her she was more important to him than her brother was? Because, it was true, it always had been. So I dealt with her. Utad had repeated his qualifying statement. You are just going to have to explain, Utad, Finan replied, shaking his head. It's been a long, tiring day, and so I gave her to Ethelwold to punish on my behalf. You did what? The usually loquacious Finan was lost for words. The day before we went to battle at Thundersley, before we faced Heston with Edward's promised troops, before I found out the bastard was Ragnar's murderer. But Finan was still processing Utad's words. You listened to Ethelwold? Finan shook his head, and looked north again. Hold on just a minute. This was when Alfred was ill. She disappeared. Came back to Winchester, then disappeared again. He looked back to Utad, willing his friend to take back what he had just been telling him, saying it was untrue, for Finan had seen the state of her on the morning before she disappeared. I told him what I wanted done with her. But Finan had had enough, and took his friend's shoulders. You should have seen her, Utad, he shouted at his lord. Where her body was not black with bruises, it was red from welts and cuts with a blade. He tortured her. He beat her. Finan let Utad go, and looked away. I thought it was that shite Edward, he added, almost to himself. Then Finan fell silent, remembering a time long ago, in a different land, when he had wronged her, too. I told him to. I was angry. She provoked me into it. But then, Hild said that I had it false. She was there, with medicine, paid from her own money from the heathen healer to come, but she would not. For the nuns had done all they could for her. They saved my son. There never was much hope for Gisela. My God, Utad. And that was all Finan could manage, as he sank onto the damp ground, staring away into his own mind. Utad sat too. It was that, or be hanged, Utad said, quietly after a time. She allowed us all to call her a witch to shield the Britons. But Finan had a look on his face more terrible even when they were at their greatest despair, enslaved. I was there, Finan murmured, when she said it. What? More silence. Fire crackled. I just said it is funny how all I told in one place could soar out so quickly. And I suppose Ethelwold had spent a lot of time with the Danes. And there had been Danes and Norse in Erin. Utad was at a loss. But the day had been long, and he was in no mood to untangle his friend's riddles. If, indeed, Finan was his friend now he had confessed his role in Osrith's torture by Ethelwold. I promised I would help you get back Bibbenberg, Finan said, at last, and, believe me, I will help you get back Bibbenberg. Utad watched him shake his head. After that, and Finan trailed off to silence, and they both got drunk, and the matter was discussed no more.